So, hey there, why doesn't everybody introduce themselves?
Yeah, start with you. since you
All
have
right,
the mic.
yes. All right, my name is Craig Shaw Gardner. I've written a whole bunch of books. My most recent series is called Temporary Magic. It's actually a horror humor crossover. And the first one's called Temporary Monsters, it's right here.
And
But I've
it's
written a
more
lot of
fun
short
than you
stories.
can have with your pants on.
That's right, and Chris wrote a good blurb about it, so he knows. All right.
Hi,
Out of a hat.
I'm Paul Tremblay, author of A Head Full of Ghosts and Disappearance of Devil's Rock. As far as what's coming soon, it hasn't been announced publicly yet, but very soon. Concord Free Press, have you guys heard of that press? That's a few miles from here. They do this cool thing where with established authors, they'll print a book, they'll print 3,000 copies and give the books away for free. But if you get a book, you are supposed to take the money you would have spent on the book and donate it to a charity of your choosing. And then you're supposed to pass the book on. The next person that gets the book is supposed to do the same thing. So myself and Brian Evanson are reprinting like 2 novellas that are like 10 years old and are long out of print. And Concord Free Press is putting those back in print for free. So that'll be coming late this month, maybe early December, called Another Way to Fall. So I'm very excited to be in a book with Brian, and I think it's a cool, it's an amazing press. They've raised with like 5 or 6 books so far, estimated like 1.5 million to various charities. So, they're doing a great job. And then next summer is my next novel with William Morrow called The Cabin at the End of the World. Thanks.
Hi, I'm Hillary Monahan. I'm also Eva Darrows. I'm also a third name I won't admit to because it's smutty romance. Ghost smutty romance. My most recent title is The Hollow Girl. It just released on 10/10. It's about Romani witches. My grandmother was Welsh Kale Romani, and she was really cool. My next book is actually an adult weird Western coming out with Fireside Fiction called Gunsmoke and Glamour. What happens when you have Sherlock and Watson in the Old West hunting witches, and Watson just so happens to be a translating doctor. It's fun. There's a lot of crude humor in it. Let's act surprised.
Love it. When is that coming out?
Don't know yet. They haven't told me. It's a surprise. It's under what?
Is it under your name or Eva Darrows?
It's under Hillary Monahan.
Excellent. That sounds great. My name is Christopher Golden. I've been writing horror and fantasy and mystery for 25 years or so. My latest book is called Ararat, right here. Flash it around. And the next thing up, since we seem to be talking about that, is not horror, although we're talking about horror tonight. It's a massive 150,000-word epic fantasy novel I co-wrote with my friend Tim Levin called Blood of the Four, and that is out from Harper Prism in March.
Wow. Cool. How many of those 150,000 are yours?
4.
75,001.
And one. Good answer. All right, so we conceived of this as sort of a moderatorless panel. So what we're going to do is each of us are going to ask one question to the panel. We'll all answer it and sort of pass it along. So my question is very convoluted, so we'll get it out of the way first. It doesn't actually have much to do with horror in general, but I wanted to ask, as it relates to maybe your most recent novel, is there like a story, either how the novel started or the idea for it, even like something that might have happened while you were writing it that you haven't told anybody or you haven't told anyone in an interview or admitted in public about the book that you wrote? I'll go last.
Yeah, I remember you typing this question now, and my mind went blank, and my mind's gone blank again.
All right, I'll take it if you want.
You want to start? You gotta start. I'll probably come up with something.
I did my homework. I think I mentioned my grandmother was Welsh Kale Romani, and so 10 years ago I was sitting in her basement after she had read my cards, Duckering time-honored thing with the Romani people. She'd read my cards and they were shit. They were terrible. And so I'm sitting there and we were talking, and my grandmother was actually an author as well. She wrote with Charles Schultz of the Peanuts, and if you know the Hallmark cards with Maxine, the crabby old lady, my grandmother started and invented that line. So we were sitting in the basement, we were chatting, and I had a bad card reading, so it was drama. And she started telling me about this book that she wanted to write that was about 2 Romani sisters. One who fell in love with somebody that was outside of the caravan and ended up having to go out in a big gazi world and experience the world when you've been sheltered with a very insular group of people. And then one who stayed and became the apprentice to the Drabarni, which is the wise woman, clan healers, and depending on what type of rum you're talking about, they do or do not ascribe to magical practices. Some do, some don't, most don't, but there are some customs, thanks to diaspora, that still have those particular traditions. And she told me the story where she wanted to kind of do this one daughter versus the other daughter counterpoint thing. My grandmother passed away unexpectedly a little while later. And so when I followed in her footsteps and became an author, I knew I wanted to write something for her. Like, I really wanted it to be like the spirit of her in the book. I wanted Dot back. And, but at the same time, you don't want to, I didn't feel comfortable writing the story of the Romani woman going out in a world that does not understand the Romani. That's not my experience. It's not my lived experience. That's far, far better told from the point of view of somebody who's experienced that oppression. It's pretty rough. Like, Romani are some of the worst treated people literally in the world. But I was comfortable with The Witch because I was a horror author and I was like, okay, I can do this. So the Hollow Girl actually came into being because I looked at the idea she had proposed to me, and I said, I can write Romani witches, I can do it respectfully, and I'm going to put my own twist on it. So that's how this particular book came to be, was because of that interaction with her 10 years ago in a basement when she was trying to make me feel better about a really rotten tarot card reading. So that's my story.
All right, well, let me actually come up with something here.
Let me invent this.
Yeah, that's right. All right, well, I write a bunch of different kinds of books. I've written novelizations, I've done mysteries, science fiction, fantasy. But I have this one sort of book that keeps coming back. If I find a genre I really like, I read a whole bunch of them, and suddenly my brain goes, but what if this happened instead? And I started out writing, my very first series was a fantasy series about a wizard who's allergic to magic. And so I've been reading a lot of, horror noir stuff and all, psychic detectives and all this stuff. And I was going on and on, but I said, oh, no, this won't really happen like this. This will happen like this. And that's where this came from. It's my own odd, perverted mind. All right?
It's what happens when you apply the Craig to it.
That's right.
Exactly. That's cool. I guess what I want to say about Ararat is that when I do books like this, so Ararat just quickly is basically there's an earthquake on Mount Ararat in Turkey, and it reveals a previously hidden cave on the side of the mountain. And when people enter the cave, they discover that the walls are actually timber, and they realize that they think that this might actually be Noah's Ark, and then at the back of the Ark, they find a coffin, an ancient coffin with a cadaver inside that has horns. And I won't give any more of the setup, but basically there are a whole bunch of disparate elements in the story that required research. And I'm lazy, so I tend to call on friends and say, our friend, the author, Dana Cameron, is an archaeologist, and Dana has a lot of friends in that field. So I was able to say, Dana, here are sort of a range of things I would need to know more about in order to write this book. Would you be willing to tap some of your friends and get me some information about this, that, the other thing? And I did a lot of the research, made some phone calls, talked to a mountain climber, a guy who leads tours up the side of Mount Ararat to talk to him about elevation sickness or altitude sickness and all of that stuff, and about climbing this particular mountain. That was cool. But while Dana was doing me that favor, I was already writing. And of course, the trick of Mount Ararat, if you believe that Noah's Ark ever landed there or might still be there, is that there is not enough water, even if you melted every bit of ice on the planet, to raise anything that high. So that in itself is something that needs to be addressed. But the thing that really needed to be addressed is that when they came back with all of their information, I realized that there were no boats. In the era at the time at which Noah lived, there was no such thing as shipbuilding in any way. So we had to sort of reverse engineer what it would be like if you built an ark. I mean, clearly it was possible to do it, but we had to sort of figure out if we were going to build this, how would it be done? So that was kind of an interesting little side note of the kinds of things that come up. And you always tell, I was talking to a guy about this last night, anytime I consult an expert about something that I need to use in my book, I always say, I don't need you to believe it when it's done. I just need everybody else to buy it. So,
Wow, those are really good answers. And now I'm going to go home and tweet, Chris Golden says Bible wrong. See how that goes.
it wouldn't be the first time, Paul.
I was going to tell you a little bit, anecdotal, maybe humorous. It is more humorous for me now in the light of the years that have passed with A Head Full of Ghosts, just in sort of in the writing of it. For a full year before I came up with the idea of A Head Full of Ghosts, I was really sort of lost and struggling as a writer. I mean, my life was fine. I mean, family is great, kids great, but things didn't go well with my first two novels. I was slowly working on this other novel that I had described to my agents, and it was going to be sort of a weird, goofy comedy with maybe some mix of other genre elements. So as far as he knew, I was working on this novel, and I was like 100 pages in, but it was just really slow going. And then I got the idea for A Head Full of Ghosts. I was like, oh, a horror novel, you know? And I was excited enough in the idea that I put the other novel away and started on it, but I wasn't excited enough to tell my agent about it, because like, oh, he might not go for this or be excited about this. So now it's June, and I have like 100 pages of A Head Full of Ghosts. And my agent calls, he's like, hey, how's that Manson novel going? Because it was going to involve Charles Manson some way. It's like, oh, yeah, that novel. Hey, I've got this new thing I'm working on. He's like, oh, yeah? I was like, it's sort of like a retelling of The Exorcist. And he was like, huh. You know, and then I told him a little bit more. It's like, all right, that sounds like it could be good. It's like, why don't you send me the 100 pages? And I sent it to him. And the feedback he gave me was actually really bad. In his defense, it was only 100 pages, so he didn't necessarily know it was going, but it almost totally derailed the book. Like, I stopped writing it for a week, but luckily I got to a point where, you know, I sort of just stopped questioning myself and said, I have to write this book, and then I'll deal with it after. You know, and the dealing with it after was a little bit scary, because I thought, geez, you know, do I believe in this enough? Like, would I change agents? You know, I've had this guy for years and years, and I consider him a friend. But I believed enough in the idea that I plowed through and wrote the book. And to my agent's credit, when he saw the whole thing, he wrote me an email saying, wow, I'm so happy to send you an email to say that I was wrong, that, you know, you wrote it the way you were supposed to, and this was great. So I don't think I've ever told my agent of 10 years now how close I came, at least in my head, of the, you know, the contingencies or worst case scenarios of having to look for a new agent. Because to me, that's the most horrific part of publishing.
Did you
is
just say
looking
you
for
were
an
going to
agent.
write a comedy about Charles Manson?
Well,
I'm still stuck on that.
no.
I'm glad you came back to that,
Yes.
Hillary.
It was going to be called, it's a great title, I mean, I think I've mentioned this title before, so it's out there, but it was going to be called Charles Manson Doesn't Answer My Letters. And it was going to be an 8th grader who was actually my fictional son, who wanted to end the world out of kindness because he thought there was too much suffering. So he was writing, like
That
the
sounds
novel
really
was going to be,
joyful.
the novel was going to be letters to Charles Manson, like him telling him how he's trying to go about ending the world.
So, number one, I would like to say that I would read that book, and I hope you finish
Yeah.
it. And number two, I would like to say that what you folks don't know is that beginning at 8 p.m. will be Paul's one-man show performing his book about Charles, Letters to Charles Manson Doesn't Answer My Letters. Yeah.
If only Mrs. Haringa was here, because she was a character in the novel.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, well, you know,
All right, let's move on to the next question of the
I like that.
moderatorless panel.
one-man show.
Now. Yeah, sure.
Go ahead, Craig.
Okay, I was thinking about this, and it occurred to me, how do we form our thoughts about horror as children? And I was thinking, what was the very first, and not like you don't get scared because you get scared because there's a wasp or there's a spider or something, but what was the very first media event that you saw that actually really frightened you? And I realized when I thought about it, I'll tell it later, but I realized when I thought about it, that the thing that frightened me first is actually very fundamental to the rest of my horror writing over the years. And it's based on the movie, mine. But anyways, I'll talk about it later. Nobody's ready for this. I didn't put this ahead of time.
So when we say media event, you just mean like it could be a movie or it could be, okay. So not like it's something that happened in real life. I got you, okay.
Can it be real life?
Well,
No.
For many locals of an age, maybe you remember Creature Double Feature on Saturday afternoons, WLVI, Channel 56.
Where
So
would
for
we
me-
be without that?
Yeah. So for me, my first exposure was the Godzilla movie or the kaiju movie that would play first, and then usually it was either a Hammer film or a black and white film. And I loved Godzilla and Rodan, and the second movie would scare the ever-loving crap out of me and give me nightmares. So I can't tell you when I ever thought of it as, oh yeah, Godzilla movie is, I don't know if it's horror per se, but it uses giant monsters. It wasn't scary to me. It was cool. So I think my first reactions was, wow, Godzilla is really cool. And then the second movie would be terrifying, like the brain that wouldn't die. Like, I mean, it's such an awful movie, but when I saw it as a kid, when that thing came out of the closet and ripped that chunk out of that dude's neck, sorry, spoiler alert, that was the kind of stuff that really bothered me. So that was like late 70s, early 80s, and right around with that, but the thing that truly terrified me was seeing the advertisements for The Day After Tomorrow. And we live in that world again, so I'm going to stop talking about that.
I grew up in a house that was built in the 1700s. We had the basement was the dirt floor. We still had the servants' quarters out back, and the outhouse had become our shed for our lawnmower. And we had secret passages in the house that were actually like passages that people would hide in case of, settler problems. Yeah, colonialism. Okay, so basically, I mean, we moved into the house, and the first thing that happened when we moved into the house is my parents went up to clean out the attic, and they had to pull 8 urns out of the attic. And so I'm like, oh, hey, look, Mommy's got vases. And she comes downstairs, and she says to my stepdad at the time, she's like, who are these people? And I'm like, what do you mean, who are these people? Because they're just vases. And she's like, no, these are urns. And I said, what do you mean they're urns? She's like, there's dead people in them. So I'm little. I mean, and we're calling up the people that we get the house from to figure out whose dead people these are. And that was like basically setting the stage for the trauma that was my childhood. Like, my stories I could go on for days. But I was always fascinated with haunted houses because of my upbringing. This remains to this day. It is fundamental to me. I am fascinated with ghosts because this house was just a creep factory. I had the best slumber parties. And the first media that actually kind of channeled exactly how my house made me feel was a Disney movie, of all things, called Watcher in the Woods. And it scared the crap out of me. Like, and I mean, this was Bette Davis, and like, it's a Disney movie. They got the Disney thing on it. So you go to the VHS store. Remember when you'd like go there for like scour the shelves, And I was little, and I went up to the kids section, and I'm like, oh, hey, look, Mom, it's a Disney movie, right? And I grab it, and there's like some satanic ritual in the woods with a girl in a mirror, and help me, Danny, but not that. And it was like, that was the first time I can honestly recognize media channeling all of the fears that I had as a kid from the house into a movie. So I think that has stayed with me, and Watcher in the Woods still freaks me out a million years later, so that'll tell you something. Trauma lasts a long time.
I just want to say I can't wait for Hillary's answer to my question, because it's like I wrote it for you, which I didn't. So firstly, we might really be better served for me to turn this question over to my mom, who's sitting in the back of the room. But weirdly, I will say that my answer is a movie that came when I was an adult. I mean, when I was a kid, I watched Creature Double Feature, and I watched all those movies. My favorite thing when I was a kid that set the tone for my life was Kolchak the Night Stalker, which I watched in reruns at like 11 p.m. I would go to sleep at 9, and my dad would wake me up to watch it at 11 o'clock. The Twilight Zone, stuff like that. I loved all that stuff, but I don't remember feeling really scared of it. And I'm sure there were episodes of Twilight Zone that had that effect, but I don't really remember even seeing like all the, slasher movies. I do remember that Nightmare on Elm Street and Aliens both gave me nightmares. But I didn't feel that scared when I was in the movie theater, if that makes sense. Weirdly, the first time I can remember really being terrified, and it seems really quaint now, I was working for the company that owned Billboard magazine, and I got my hands on a bootleg tape when the Blair Witch Project came out. And the interesting thing about that, of course, is the story of the Blair Witch Project is that it's all of this real stuff that has been put together like a documentary, and it's been secret, and it was sort of spread on the internet and all this. Obviously I knew it was made up. I knew it wasn't real. But I think that added to it, that I had this sort of bootleg tape of a movie that most people had not seen yet. And I popped it in to the VCR intending to go and sit down, and I perched sort of on the edge of the coffee table, and I was still there when the movie was over. And actually, it's the only time in my entire life that I remember, and you watch it now, and I've seen it subsequently, and it's not scary at all, maybe partly because of all the things that we've seen since then. But I actually remember, and I was an adult at this point, I remember pausing the movie to catch my breath.
He had a bootleg. That's how we saw it too.
Oh, really?
It was an extra level of graininess.
Yeah,
because
yeah,
it was
yeah,
a bootleg,
yeah.
So it made
Yeah,
it even scarier.
exactly.
So that was our
Exactly.
experience,
So
too.
it was, and
Yeah.
that was the first time I literally remember actually being scared of a movie or a TV show. I'm sure when I was little, I mean, there was also the time I was on the back porch, Mom, with the little black and white TV, although it doesn't matter because the movie was black and white, watching Frankenstein. I was 7 years old. And I wasn't scared, but when he throws the girl into the pond and she drowns, I cried. I was 7, not because I was sad for her, but I was also really sad for him. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Because it was, but I wasn't scared, if that makes sense. But that Blair Witch Project, I was a grown up, and it scared the crap out of me.
I laughed when Bambi's mom died when I went to the drive-in.
You killed her. I know you did.
Like I was 5 and we were at the drive-in.
Dear Twitter, Golden sides with Frankenstein versus little girl.
Well, it wouldn't be the worst thing said about me on Twitter today. Anyway.
Today.
All right, well, when I was 4 years old, my father took me to see Pinocchio. I don't know, Pinocchio was a damn scary movie.
You're little, yeah.
When you're little. But Monster of the Whale and all that stuff. But what really got to me was Pinocchio's in this town, and there's all these other boys. They're sort of hanging out in street corners. They're starting to smoke cigars. I don't know, which I thought was sort of cool at 4 years old. And they all turn into donkeys. That freaked me out completely. And and they were doing something they weren't supposed to do, but Pinocchio didn't quite know what they were doing. He didn't quite know what was happening. And I realized that was sort of the way I was at 4 years old, because my parents would tell me what was right and what was wrong, but it didn't make a lot of sense a lot of times when you're 4 years old, And so I would sometimes what they would do would seem just totally arbitrary. And this seemed like the next level. I was going to do something, and I was going to be a donkey the next thing, man. And I got hysterical. Oh, I had to be taken out of the theater. I got hysterical. My father took me back in a little bit later, but it was like this sort of cosmic thing that my 4-year-old brain could barely comprehend. And I realized, it's a thin line between what's right and what's horribly wrong, and that informs a lot of the rest of my
and that
my
scene
work.
is both.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
All
So that's it. Somebody else's question?
Would you like to do yours?
I'll go next.
Okay.
All right. So my question is, how have your deepest, most primal fears changed from childhood to adulthood, or have they? The things that you were most afraid of as a child versus what you're most afraid of now.
It's a nice light reading for us, Chris.
It's a horror panel. We write about the things that scare us. So
Yeah, I think that when I was a kid, yes, things that jumped up and things that, spiders and stuff like that were scary. It was like more physical objects. I think as I grew older and became acquainted with emotions and other people who dealt with their emotions perhaps not honestly, that I learned that there was a whole other level of swamp down there that was going on. And I actually find personal interaction sometimes to be yes, very it's like I've written a lot of stories about relationships, and a lot of them are sort of autobiographical, and it's about how you expect something to proceed one way and it goes a completely different way. And yeah, that's what horror is the unexpected. But I find it particularly frightening when it's emotionally unexpected. So, and that's new to me as an adult.
Geez, I mean, I guess it would be both. I mean, I think as a child, most of the time I think I was reacting viscerally to images in particular, because I wasn't much of a reader as a kid. So for me, it was always movies and TV. You know, and looking back, I think I can now, sort of as an adult, sort of understand better, like, why those things, you know, so terrified me. Now, clearly, you know, with the last two books, well, maybe not clearly, but with the last two books, and even the one that's coming out this summer, they all sort of revolve around families and parents and kids, and it changes that point of view. So I'm clearly working out a lot of my anxiety about being, you know, a parent. But at the same time, I think what it all has in common, and it actually goes back to what Craig was talking about with Pinocchio, is that line in ambiguity. I think all the fears that I have, what they have in common is, geez, you know, is reality as really as real as we think it is? Or, you know, do I know my loved one as well as I think I know them? It's like there's always that ambiguous line. And in most of my horror stories, there, you know, once there's the reveal, it still might be ambiguous, but usually the reveal is, that line is a lot fuzzier than we always want to believe it is.
I'm going to tell a story about clowns. So I was the rare kid that, as a kid, I didn't care about clowns. It wasn't like a terrifying thing for me. Like, they didn't excite me. They didn't do it. They were just clowns. I didn't really care about them. So when I was 19 years old, I had my first, or no, I was 17. I was 17, and I was 17 years old. I was a senior in high school, and I had a weekend job at a coffee shop. And I was thin and stacked and did very well for myself on the tip front, which is why I kept taking the shift I wasn't supposed to take, because I took the 8 to 12 because there was a dog track around the corner from where I worked, and the guys would get out of the dog track at about 10 or 11 at night, and then they would come up and get their coffees. And if they had a big winning night and they saw a cute girl at the drive-thru, they would give really good tips. So I really liked this job. My mom had questions about where all the money was coming from, and I'm like, no, I'm serious. It's just the tips at the window, I promise. But like, you have that moment where your fear, I feel like, when you're a kid, goes from the things that aren't tangible to the tangible. And like, there's like a metaphor in what I'm about to tell you guys. So I'm at the drive-thru window, and a guy orders a coffee. Okay, fine. He drives up to the window in a clown van. Okay, that's fine. He drives up to the window in a clown van. I go to the window. I'm like, hey, there's a Binky the Clown at the window, because, you know, whatever. And I open the door, and he doesn't have any pants on. So Binky the Clown is there, and he is binkied, and he is pantsless. And there is yarn in places that there ought not be yarn.
Was this Tom Snigoski? Because it sounds like something Tom.
But like, I swear, like, when you talk about this, I feel like when you're a kid, your fears go from these weird nebulous concepts and things that are unrealistic to, there's a naked clown at my window and he's showing me his wang. So I don't like clowns now because of Binky the Clown. And I'm sitting at Merrimack Valley Horror Festival next to this guy over here, like a couple weeks ago, and he's like, hey, look at my new book cover, and there's this huge clown face on it, and I almost beat him to death in the middle of Merrimack Valley. But like,
For the record, Jim had pants on.
for once, no, I'm like, but in all seriousness, like that, and you know, when you read The Hollow Girl, it's about sexual assault, and I feel like, particularly for women, this question is kind of loaded because I'm a rape victim. I wrote about rape. My fears went from intangible to tangible very quickly as I matured. And this clown thing, for all that it is funny, and I tell it with an alarming regularity, it does kind of exactly highlight what you're asking. Like, you know, it is. That was the moment that I can honestly say I went from being afraid of ghosts in my attic to clowns with no pants on. So, you know, that's my life story. I'm moving on now.
Well, we all know what to do next Halloween when we go visit Hillary's house. With pants on. With pants on. I realized what I was saying. I'm like, with pants.
Your
just
funeral
FYI. Clown next year. Everybody at Merrimack Valley. Clowns.
That'll go over big.
Anyway,
Just have red yarn with you and I'll be like,
oh,
yeah.
I don't want the image, thank you.
You're welcome.
So, when I have an older brother who's about 2 years older than I am, and he loved to torment me. My older sister is 7.5 years older. She loved to torment me. Her favorite thing was to make me cry and take photos of me.
Oh, I love her already.
Yeah, and
That's where Jack gets it from.
and yeah, exactly. And she and my brother would tell me that I was from Mars and that they had cut off my antenna. My mom had cut off my antenna and painted me this color so I could pass. So I'm actually Martian, FYI. But that would make me angry and sad and probably a little scared. But my brother was actually, he and his best buddy Gary would do everything they could to scare me by. They would go in the woods to smoke cigarettes, and they didn't want me to rat them out to my mom, which I totally would have, by the way. And so they started telling me that there were werewolves. I was really little. That there were werewolves that lived in the woods, and that so I shouldn't go in there. And so I was scared of that. And then there was a time when they told me there was a burglar in the basement, and they ran down to the basement with knives from the kitchen and all this stuff, totally pretending that that was happening just to scare the shit out of me. So those are the things I was scared of when I was little. All these sort of things invented by my brother. And also, the things that I saw, I guess a little bit in movies and stuff, but that stuff didn't scare me as much as the idea of the prowler in the basement. When I got older, I found that the things that I tended to write about were the ways that I was sort of dealing with the themes of my concerns as a parent and as a person getting older. I had an uncle who died from complications due to Alzheimer's disease. And to me, nothing is more terrifying than that. And so I actually wrote 2 novels, a novel called Wildwood Road and a novel called The Boys Are Back in Town, both of which are about actually sort of losing yourself. They're about identity and what happens if your identity begins to be erased. That theme actually is carried forward in some degree in a novel of mine called Dead Ringers, which is about people who in Boston who begin to encounter their doppelgangers. And that has an additional sort of adult fear, which is they're meeting these people who look exactly like them, and everybody sort of thinks that they are them, and they're better versions of you. They're like living a better life and and they're in better shape than you are, and they're being more successful than you are, and all that stuff. So it's so that's part of it as well. So those kinds of things, and anything happening to sort of your kids or whatever. That's So those are the kinds of things I'm exercising as an adult. But they're not things, of course, that a child would even think about. Really, usually, anyway. Depends, I guess. So that's my answer. What's your question, Hillary?
I liked your question. You had a good question. All the questions are good. They're really good so far. Horror is really nothing without its tropes. We all love a good trope when it's done well, and we all hate it when it plays into tropes and it does derivative stuff. So I guess my question is, what tropes do you like? What tropes do you hate? What tropes would you like to see reinvented or readdressed? I mean, it's, for me, it's the tropiest genre, I think, pretty much by far. So what things do you think could be done better, could be done well again, et cetera, et cetera?
I didn't do my homework. Someone else have to go first.
I mean, I can sort of start, but I just talked.
Oh, come on, it wasn't that hard of a question.
So, I mean, what I'll
I
say
haven't
is,
told
I
you
like
like
tropes.
5
I
days.
know.
I like them too.
the weird thing is, I like them all. Craig, did you have a?
No, I mean, yeah, it's the same. Yeah, I mean, because we read horror, and because we watch horror, we love this shit. I mean, it's just like, ooh, a witch, ooh, I mean, but yes, but you want to confound the reader. You want to pull the rug out from them, and so, I mean, I think that you can. But because the tropes are sort of our common literary experience or media experience, you can sort of lead people down that path, which I think is really interesting, and then do something very unexpected. Because if you do so, that can be far more frightening, actually, than what people are expecting.
Like, I think if you actually managed to take, like, Anne Rice vampires and make them scary, that'd be really cool.
Yeah.
Because to me, the derivative, the Anne Rice vampire is done to death. Like, I loved reading it the first time, the second time. I even liked it the 57th time, but I'm a little done right now. And, like, for me, that's kind of, I love me a scary vampire. Like, I'm 30 Days a Night, like, Salem's Lot kind of girl all the way. Like, give them to me nasty. I want to see, like, people in wood chippers type stuff, like, that's me.
So firstly, you're breaking the rules.
No, I'm not.
I guess it's your question. You can do whatever you want.
It's my question. Go away.
Go ahead. Continue.
But I said what tropes do you like too? That was in there.
Yeah.
I'm not breaking any rule. You know what? You go, Golden. You're so smart. You go. Everybody look at Christopher Golden. He's gonna be smart now.
Okay, I will. No, I won't be smart. I can't promise that. I was actually just going to say that I don't. There aren't any tropes in horror. Like the minute you say, "Oh, I hate the trope of the final girl," then people start doing brilliant things with the idea of the trope of the final girl. So I don't think that there is a trope that I could say that I could look at and say I hate that, unless we're talking specifically about gender-related tropes in horror. Because although I think we're all working to sort of flip that on its head, and it's happening, and it's that anybody who's still, if you try to write a straight-up traditional horror story in which the gender roles are from the 1950s, then it's weak. It looks foolish. The idea that it's like the lost skeleton of Cadavra. You stay here, pretty lady, and I'll go fix the tire. Like anything like that smacks of that, which lingered a while in horror. I think.
A while.
Yeah, I mean, so that I can't stand. But anything else, anything you'd say is a sort of a horror trope. I embrace those things because every single time I want to look at it and say, how can I take what people expect from this and give them something.
See, like, I love your example of the final girl, because to me, The Mask of Leslie Vernon is an absolute great example of taking that. And if you haven't seen this movie, it's hysterical. It's a mockumentary about a college journalism student who's interviewing the guy who basically wants to be the next big name in serial killers. So he wants to be like a Freddy or a Mike Myers or whatever. And that's kind of what I was getting at with the question.
Right.
Was
and she and her crew are.
Yeah, and she and her crew are like following him around as he prepares for his infamous killing spree. So to me, that was a trope subversion that was done remarkably well. Like, and an example of exactly what I was looking for. It didn't have to be
Another great, that's Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon.
Yep.
The other one that comes to mind, if you haven't seen that and you like horror, you should see that. But this one, my wife hates horror movies. Anything that sort of is like gory or scary or whatever, she hates them. But I showed my wife and my daughter a movie called Tucker and Dale versus Evil. And one of my favorite little subgenres and tropes in horror are what I have always referred to as killbillies, which is basically the college students go out into the woods on vacation or what have you and either break down or go skinny dipping or whatever, and then they're attacked and killed by a bunch of backwoods deliverance rejects. And Tucker and Dale versus Evil is a sweet, charming, funny, and really gory twist on that story that subverts everything you expect from that trope. So that's the kind of thing, yeah.
Perfect.
So I love them all. I just think, like, you take any trope and you can, except one. The sweet, innocent virgin dies first? Yeah, no. I don't, although maybe that's the challenge. I think we'll do a whole anthology called The Sweet, Innocent Virgin Dies First.
Yeah. No, I'm in agreement with no tropes or sort of no major tropes
Dies last. Go ahead.
or like should be say no, don't do this story. Like, I can say I don't like zombies, then like, oh wait a minute, I've watched 7 seasons of Walking Dead and read the comics and all that stuff. I will say though, I mean, I think obviously like I've thought at least with 2 of the last 3 novels, The Head Full of Ghosts, part of the idea was like, how would I do an Exorcist novel? That sort of would twist things around a little bit. Like I literally thought that first. And with the novel that's coming out this summer, A Cabin at the End of the World, it started off with, I had a kernel of an idea. I was like, oh man, I don't like home invasion movies generally. I mean, there are some that I do like. Obviously, there's classics like Wait Until Dark, etc. But the excitement to me was, oh, how would I write a home invasion kind of style story that, I would want to sit through or watch? I would say but I will say the smallest subset of horror, and maybe it doesn't even count as a trope, but I feel like it used to happen a lot more in the 90s, especially in short fiction, was horror stories with rock bands. I find almost universally they suck, and they just ring so inauthentic to me. That doesn't mean you can't try it, but just know that I will be judging
Have you
it.
seen the actual movie Suck?
No, I haven't.
Okay, so there is a rock mockumentary called
Yeah.
Suck about a band that gets slowly turned into vampires, and it is absolutely hysterical.
Yeah.
So if you want to see that
Okay,
and not hate
I'll
it,
try it, yeah.
that would be, and it does, it subverts all the,
Yeah.
I know exactly what you're talking
Right.
about, and it's
But
literally doing
but
that.
it's funny though. So I mean, I think I feel like it's, I don't want to say easier, but maybe, is it easier? Can I say that? To subvert it and make it humorous? Because you're like,
Yes.
oh, we're laughing at the trope, as
Yes.
opposed to actually trying to be, when I say serious, I mean like scary
But you
or
can
horrific.
still subvert the trope
Right.
and be serious.
Yeah, so I'm saying, I
Yes.
think is
Right?
it harder to do that? I
Yes.
think maybe, definitely.
It's harder to
Right.
do it effectively.
Yeah.
To do it well, to find a new way to do something. Although I take that back because comedy's the hardest thing of all. Craig is very funny,
True.
but I'm,
Right.
you know.
But I would say Poppy Z. Bright is like one of the few horror writers that I had read. He's Billy Martin now, but when he was writing as Poppy Z. Bright, Poppy wrote some really cool horror stories that mixed music that felt authentic to me as, a self-identifying music punk snob. Those things felt like real to me.
I have two. Was it The Cleanup by Skip and Spectre? Is that the one
Oh.
that the rock band was?
I haven't read that one
The
yet.
Scream, that's The Scream. Scream is actually pretty good.
Yeah.
And the unpublished, and you should get a copy, Rio Ewers wrote a novel called 1,000 Trees.
Oh, is that the next thing that's coming?
Nope,
Oh.
it's not been published. But it's brilliant and totally crazy, and it involves a rock band. It's really good. Anyway, so
And I would say the last thing, the trope I do want to see someday. I just don't have an idea for it. I would love to see not a movie, but a giant monster horror novel that doesn't play it as kitsch or as Godzilla necessarily, but that's actually scary and emotionally heavy. So basically, I'm asking for the host as a book. Yeah, I'd love to see that.
what if the
maybe
monster's
someday I would
dead?
like to
Does
do
that
it.
count?
Yeah, why not?
There's what is her name? There's a woman who wrote a phenomenal novel about her sort of town with the giant sea monster that's dead in the lake in the middle of the town.
Oh, really?
Does anybody else know what I'm talking about?
No.
It's a sort of literary.
Oh, that sounds really cool.
It's great. I'll have to think of its.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, Hillary, what I was saying before is that the asker was intended to back clean up on the question, so that's why I interrupted you before. So
Did I ruin it?
no, not at all. But that's what I.
I think that question of whether or not trope subversion is easier as a comedy is an actually really cool question to ask,
Yeah.
because I do think it is. Because the nature of the trope is that it's been done to death so much that it borders on ludicrous.
Right.
So I think it lends itself to that humor very, very easily, but saying that humor's hard to write is absolutely
Yes,
true, because trying to write
absolutely,
humor means you can't punch down. If you're good at humor, you're not punching down at people. You're not picking on people less, in less good shape or less privileged than you are. So but that's a really cool thing to think about, because it does kind of lend itself to humor, which I hadn't, because I'm thinking about it, and I'm saying this thing about the Nazi vampires. What We Do in Shadows was my favorite movie last
Oh
year.
yeah, I love that movie.
And again, that's the Nazi vampires. That's
Yeah.
absolutely what that is. But that's also poking fun at it
Mm-hmm.
too, So it's
Yeah,
cool.
right on.
Did you have something more you want to say about tropes?
Did you answer this? I can't
Yes,
remember.
I
Oh, yeah, right.
Long ago. Well, maybe there are some questions from the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Audience time.
Anybody?
First one's the hardest.
Nope.
Oh, here we go. Yeah.
So, I've noticed that horror is sort of like comedy in that it's got this build up and flow, build up then payoff and build up and payoff, and each payoff in good horror, each payoff builds into the next cycle until the very end. How do you manage that cycle in your books?
Increasing the stakes. Because, something that my editor at My first, my debut was horror, was with actually Hyperion. And one of the things that my editor said to me then that has stuck with me is that more than pretty much any other genre, thriller or horror, it's depending on pace and pacing, and how if you lose them, it's very easy to lose them and not get them back. And it's because there's not a reward that escalates as it goes on. So that would be my take.
My example would be Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein. And as you know in that film,
Or you should know.
yes, you should know in this film, for some reason they want Costello's brain for the monster, right? Which is the most ludicrous thing in the entire world, right? But Abbott and Costello keeps turning to other people to help him, and it turns out the main guy who wants to help him is a wolf man, for God's sakes. And he goes on, and everything he does makes it worse and worse and worse. And so it just gets funnier and funnier and funnier as it goes along. Because, it's both hopeless and incredibly funny. And of course, they turn it around last minute because it's an Abbott and Costello movie. But, that's the sort of thing they do. You just build.
No, those are great answers. I would say, maybe just to add to it, what I tend to focus on if I'm writing a horror story or a novel, and I know there's going to be a few horrific events, I would say, I tend to focus on what happens afterward, or after the reveal or after the horror. And I find by focusing a lot of my mental energy on what happens afterwards, that helps me lead up to it. Because I feel like, and it's not like I write it backwards either. I don't write what comes after, but I find that I focus on, I have to not necessarily build up to the actual action. I have to make what happens after at least emotionally authentic to me. And I feel like that helps me with the setup and the actual event itself, if that makes sense. It probably doesn't, because I'm just talking out of my ass.
It's a talent.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add to that?
I already answered.
She already answered, yeah.
The only thing I would add to it is that I'm usually not very good at it. And that, but what I do try to do is never allow that level of tension to sink below a certain level. So, we try to build up to a certain plateau, and then over the course of the story, you rise from it. Hopefully the level gets generally higher throughout the course of the story, but whatever you do, even in the quiet moments, you should still never let the tension get below a certain level once you've begun. Like, once you're there, you never want to get, it's a lot like another experience now that I'm thinking about it. But in any case,
What experience is that, Chris?
and then when you get, my mom is here, Hillary.
That makes it more fun.
When you get to, but I also feel like a lot of times with horror, sometimes I appreciate, Paul, what you're saying, and I do want to try to get to the point where in the aftermath of whatever's going on, there is an emotional payoff, there is something, but I tend to find that over time, that portion of my novels tends to get shorter.
Yeah.
Because I feel like if you've done your job in the first 95% of the story, a lot of that stuff, a lot of that business kind of takes care of itself. So I want an emotional payoff. I want a couple scenes at the end, but I don't want to do the never-ending goodbye of the Shire in Lord of the Rings. I don't want to do that. And
Right.
what I also try to do in my horror novels, not in my other books, but in my horror novels, I also try to do that one sort of final moment that says, that we always talk about. Jim and I teach a class, we always talk about the ending should be both surprising and inevitable. And in that last moment, I try to come up with something that's going to be both surprising and inevitable, that is literally, it could be just the final page, the final two pages or whatever it might be,
Right.
that changes everything, and then keeps the, if I'm not continuing to write the story, it keeps the reader working on the story for a while after they've closed the book.
Sure. No, and obviously every story is different, right? I mean, so it's.
Yeah, I wasn't, I'm
right.
just saying, like, in my mind, that's
Yeah.
the way I'm kind of coming at it now, from a rhythm.
What's kind of
Yeah.
funny, though,
So
is
my-
that
yeah.
both of those approaches hinge
Right.
so much on you buying into the protagonist, though.
Yeah.
Like, if you can buy into the protagonist, you not concentrating so much on that aspect means you'll coast by rooting for him. And in your aspect, if you're rooting for the protagonist, you want to see the emotional depths of which your protagonist is suffering. So like it's all that pacing stuff and it's all that approach stuff, but it really hinges on buying into who the main character is or
Sure.
who the focus of the scene anyway, because both are valid
Right.
at that point.
And maybe this is more like, talking about what type of scare you're talking about, or horrific event. Like, with the Head Full of Ghosts, my idea was, all right, there's going to be an attempted exorcism. And I wanted to make sure that happened, like, not at the end, but at like the 2/3 mark or the 3/4 mark, because what comes after that to me was, there was plenty of horrific stuff, but to me what happens after that is like the most horrific part of that story.
Right.
As
Yeah.
opposed to like a denouement or something like
Right,
that.
and but
Yeah.
structurally, like, I wouldn't say that Act 3 of A Head Full of Ghosts
Right.
is like a denouement at that point.
Sure.
It's its whole other thing that is what you've really been building
Yeah,
toward.
right.
The novel isn't building toward the exorcism. The novel is building toward what comes after. I'm telling the author. I'm mansplaining the author to him. Kind of thing. In my experience as a reader, Paul.
Right. No, I totally get what you're saying. But
Yeah.
I guess I didn't explain it well enough earlier. I meant like one of the events of when I write a horror novel, I try to make one like event like the center of things, and I want things to like spider out from that.
Right.
So obviously you want to build toward an end that's going to be memorable, and resonate. But I don't know. To me, it's interesting to me like how, like I work under the idea that horror is this reveal of this terrible truth, and then what are the spider webs that leak out from there, both like forward and back. But I think we were
Right.
talking about the same thing,
Yeah.
just in different ways.
I think so.
All right.
Yes.
So how or why did each of you end up becoming writers?
Clown with no pants. How did you not? I mean,
I mentioned my grandmother, and some of my earliest memories are of my grandmother with a typewriter that weighed as much as I did. Like those old typewriters, those things are hardcore. And she would be in there, and she was a hunt and pecker. So like this woman's writing for her entire life like a T-Rex, like, and you would hear her furiously going at this giant typewriter. And if I made too much noise before The Price is Right, Grandma yelled. And everybody went quiet. They were terrified. And I think I grew up with it. So for me, it was a I'm conditioned thing. And I was like, I too want to yell at people to be quiet a lot. And then I got married and became a writer. So, in all seriousness, no, in my case, it was definitely I come from a family of artists, and I grew up with a person that was always wording. My grandmother actually like red inked my 3rd grade stories to my teacher. So like I'd like you'd come home and I'd be like, I wrote a story about going to the beach with Auntie Barbara and she was driving a pink Cadillac, and like she like took it from me and started like editing me, and I was 8. So I don't know why I aspired to be that way, but I did.
I just want to, for 1 second, go back to the comedy and horror thing.
Yeah.
And just say that it is fascinating that the clown, and again, it's not, I'm dead serious now, the clown with no pants thing is the best example of how intimately related comedy and horror are. Because
Yeah.
you could play that thing either way in a movie.
Well, it was
But in
funny
real
until
life,
it was funny until I made the parallel of why I wrote a rape novel later on. Like that's how that plays out. And
but I'm
it's-
saying like it
it's-
is that intimacy of
Yep.
comedy and horror, because they're both about the catalyst, not the catalyst. I can't even think of the word. The catharsis, excuse me,
Yep.
and the cathartic experience of the height, that emotional height that then you're released from. But anyway, I was just thinking about that.
Yeah.
Anyway, who else wants to answer that question before I?
Well, all right. I love to make up stories about everything. My wife can agree with this. She shakes her head. We're driving in the car. I pass somebody. There's somebody that has something unique about him. I'll make up an entire story about him. And this is just the way my brain works. It just bounces from one thing to another. And when I was a kid, I had a bunch of questions, and my parents would get annoyed with me. So I decided, instead of asking them about it, I'd make up the real reasons for myself. And that's really how I started writing. And I decided, of course, making up your own world is much more satisfying than the real world. And, so I would, I would just, and you can have the things come out the way you want them to come out and stuff like that. So early on, I started writing stories when I was about 10, and I just kept on doing it. And then I discovered that actually if I wrote stories and showed them to my friends, I get to be more popular, and that was a good thing too, right? But I just love to tell stories.
I'm not quite sure why. When I was a kid, I wasn't a big reader, in grade school. I was a good, goody two-shoes student. I would always do what was assigned, but in terms of, reading for pleasure, I would come home and watch MASH reruns or, shoot free throws in my backyard pretending I was Larry Bird, even though I was 5'2", 130 pounds, wasn't going to play basketball. So I was a math major in college. I went to graduate school and got a master's in math. Well, while I was in graduate school, my wife actually for my 21st birthday got me Stephen King's The Stand. And right around the same time, I'd taken a random English class at Providence, my second semester senior year, and I read Joyce Carol Oates' Where Are You Going, Where Are You Been? So that short story in The Stand made me fall in love with reading. So I went away to grad school, I had no car. My parents were getting divorced. They weren't supporting me at all, so I couldn't go anywhere. So I just sat in my dorm and I just read all the Stephen King books, and then Peter Straub and Shirley Jackson. And at the end of 2 years, I'd read all these books, and I had this weird itch to try writing a story, and I did.
For me, I was always a reader and consumer of other entertainment, TV and movies. Still am obviously hugely passionate about all of that. When I started reading comics and novels really young, collected books, obviously, again, Stephen King was a really big early influence, but not the earliest. But I actually think, weirdly for me, becoming a writer was less about, part of it was because I loved the experience of being immersed in the book. And then I thought, I have ideas for stories that I can't find on paper, so I can immerse myself in things that I'm creating. But I actually think, psychoanalyzing, that I was always the kid in class who wanted everybody, and I still am, and all my friends can attest to this, I want everybody to love what I love. If I'm super enthusiastic, like I was saying, you guys all have to see Tucker and Dale versus Evil, I want you all to go home and watch Tucker and Dale versus Evil because I love it and I want you all to love it too. And I've been that way since I was a little kid. I'm still that way. And I honestly think a big part of the reason that I started writing was because I would have an idea for a story that I would think, oh, that's really cool. And I'd want to share it with people because I'd be like, I hope other people. So when I was starting out, I would basically say to people, look, I'm not saying this is good, but I think it's fun. You should read this, and because I hope you have fun with it. And I still feel that way. If I had a good time writing it, I want people to have a good time reading it. And in the 5th grade, I would raise my hand and go, whoever likes peanut butter, raise your hand. Because I had a peanut butter sandwich that day, and I thought this is the greatest thing ever. Who else likes this? And I actually think that has a lot to do with why I do what I do.
It explains so much.
Right? Right? This is why the Merrimack Valley Halloween Book Festival exists and stuff like that. It's just, because I just want, I want other people to enjoy, Anyway.
Do we have time for one more, Steve? Yeah, sure.
If you could write in any other world, movie, TV, or book, what would you do and why?
You go first.
Some previously existing media world.
Yep, anybody else's previous.
Yeah, I have a quick answer. I would love to do an X-Files novel. I would totally be into that. Or write the novelization of the movie Ravenous. That's a deeper cut.
I talked already.
I don't know. Well,
I have so many. So
Yeah, it says yes, sort of thing. Yeah, both.
One. Pick one. I'm just kidding.
No, but
I did two, and I told him to pick one.
well, it's the sort of thing. It's fun. Both Chris and I have done a bunch of media tie-in work, and so I got to do. Well, I did. I wrote a novelization of the first Michael Keaton Batman, among others, and so in a way, I sort of got to play in that playground already. Because when I got the chance to do Batman, I said, "Holy crap, Batman! Oh, right. So I love that sort of thing. But yeah, I might take like an iconic hero someplace and do something. It'd be fun to write a Punisher book, but
Didn't if my memory serves me, didn't you also do the novelization of The Lost Boys?
I did indeed do the novelization of The Lost Boys, yes. And
I forgot about that.
which
till
is one of
just
those
now.
things. Well, yeah, that's the book that book among all my books. That's the book that goes for tons of money
On eBay.
on
yeah,
eBay.
exactly.
Yes, I mean because there's a couple Lost Boys fan sites say, "Oh, this book is pretty good. It has stuff that isn't in the movie."
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it goes for big bucks. Yeah.
I've done tons of media tie-in work over the years, and including video games and a bunch of other stuff. And I just am one of the writers on the new Hellboy movie, so that was a pretty good experience. That's working in somebody else's world. I've also written a lot of comic books, which is all working in other people's worlds. So I'm sort of running out of boxes to tick as far as like fanboy things that I really, really like to work on. One thing that I really would love to do is write a novel or a comic book series that includes or incorporates all the Marvel horror characters from the 70s. So I've written a lot of superhero related stuff, but those characters are the ones that, I mean, when I was a kid, those characters were the things that I lived for in comics. As far as like sort of other things, I don't know. There aren't a lot of. I'd like to write a novel set in the world of the TV series Vikings.
All right.
That would be great.
You can write one just that's about Vikings.
I could do that, but I love the characters.
Yeah, but I have opinions about this. We'll talk later.
In any case, I'm so. And I had another one, but now it's out of my head. I don't remember what it was. But there's, I say I run out of stuff, but there's always something that I think, oh, I'd love to do that, and then sometimes I make it happen.
This is hard for me because I don't do the fangirl thing so much as far as like a lot of, we're talking a lot of comic stuff and things like that, or I don't really watch very much TV. However, there's two things I can think of that I've actually had the thing of I would like to write an episode of this show. My favorite show ever was 6 Feet Under. I love, to this day, it's still top 5 favorite things, whatever. And if I had ever had an opportunity as a writer to write something for anything, it would be that show because I thought it was the perfect blend of macabre humor, heart, and everything else. And there was a day that I could say I would love to write something like this. I'd like to be part of something like this. And that universe was so vivid, and it was all about the characters then. And the other thing is incredibly dorky, and it's fine with this. And this is kind of funny.
Dorkier than what we've been talking.
I played World of Warcraft for 10 years, and I would really, really like to get in that writer's room for a very long.
For the game or to write a novel?
Well, either or. I got actually a job offer 2 months ago to be a head writer for another massive MMO, Guild Wars, and they said they needed a feminist who could work with problematic men, and they thought of me. And I was like, no, it's the wrong game. Damn it, it's the wrong game. But the novel tie-ins for Warcraft were underwhelming pretty much across the board, and the actual arc of the story is completely predictable and terrible and has deteriorated as time has gone on. So basically, I want to go in and fix it.
I was just going to say, so you should.
I want to fix it. Yeah, they just don't pay their writers, so why would I fix it?
Isn't that half of, if you're interested in doing any media thing, half of it is it's a thing you loved at one point, but you look at it and you think like, well, now it's wrong, but
Yeah.
I could fix it.
I'm sorry, I'm going to say a mean thing. I've said it about Buffy, about certain aspects of it. Not all of it, because I was a fan.
I didn't create Buffy. I just
No,
wrote lots
but you
of
wrote
things
lots of things.
related to it.
So I didn't want you to take it personally. But like, Buffy was another one that I could see myself going, no, but I could fix this. I could make this, I could go the extra step so that it's not half-assed feminism, but actual feminism. And so I think I can give you 2 examples. One of, I loved it so much I wanted to play in that pool box, and I hate it so much that I want to go fix it.
So before I forget, the other thing I was going to mention, and then Paul, I don't know if you. So I've pitched a lot of media tie-in things over the years, and it's always like oddball stuff. And there are several things that I have been unable to persuade editors to do. And so that was the other thing I was going to mention is a few things that I wanted to do. Number one, I wanted to do an adult, straight ahead, dead serious, not dead serious because it would have been funny, an adult supernatural novel of Bewitched. Because I actually think that there's room for that. I think it could be really cool. I mean, granted, it's Conjure Wife and all of that stuff, but still. And I once pitched my YA editor at Simon & Schuster on letting me do a straight-up take on Scooby-Doo as a teen horror novel. Because I thought I could kill that. I think I would do a fantastic job with that. I would love to do that. And the other thing that I really tried, and this is not funny at all, it was this is a dead serious thing, is that in its heyday, I was a huge fan of Rent, the musical. I later found out that one of my friends from college was part of the original cast of Rent, and we're buddies now. But I tried desperately to get this one of the houses I was working at to try to look and see if they could get the rights to novelize Rent. And at that time, it would have sold 1 million copies, but they thought that was a stupid idea. So it is, again, it's about the things that I like and I want everybody else to like.
So
Anyway.
then you wrote Scooby-Doo meets Rent.
No, that's the one I'm working on now. Yeah. It's actually called Scooby-Doo meets Rent.
You guys could do a crossover. It could be Scooby-Doo, Rent, and Charles,
And Charles Manson.
Manson.
Yeah. That's a cartoon that we're doing.
Thanks so much for coming, everybody. Really appreciate it.